I want to bring in my guests. I have been chomping at the bit to have this conversation with you all day. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Boosty. If you put in his name, Mark Sleboda, his content will show up. How you doing, Mark? You doing all right?
Jamarl, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. And I'm alive. How are you?
I am doing all right. Mark, I've come to the conclusion that the Russian government is watching my channel. And as I pointed out to you the other day, my complaints about upping the tempo, they apparently have taken my advice. And they have unleashed a withering attack. Last night had to be one of the most devastating attacks that they've launched for the entirety of the war. And it wasn't just last night, the night before. Kharkov has been on fire for 3 days. They've blown up a bunker in Kiev that apparently they were making missiles, just secondary explosions. So that factory that Germany was talking about building missiles, that seems to be gone. There have been multiple areas where they've been opening up attacks and they've been destroying factories, missile production, missile bases, bunkers, etc. And even entered Dnepro for the very first time, raising the flag in the location, not to mention advances in Sumy and advances in, there was one more, West Donetsk. This seems to be a new tempo of the war. Have they changed the special military operation into something else, or is this just an increased special military operation? What's going on? Give us context.
Well, it's obviously that the Stavka, the political body that it is, the generals of the Russian Federation, were sitting around and watching the latest episode of Jamarl Thomas, and and they said, you know what? That short-dressed young American boy is right. Now, to be fair, you're not the only one who has, shall we say, been requesting an increased tempo from the Russian military on the battlefield. Yep. Okay, so what we have seen so far is not yet any new phase of the conflict. I haven't seen anything. Yes, there has been an up-tempo. Part of that you could consider an uptick in response due to the Kiev regime's trifecta of assaults early last week, the attack on the bridges in Belgorod, including hitting a civilian passenger train on a bridge, the renewed attack on the Crimean bridge, and that Operation Spiderweb with the attack on the Russian air bases around. So you could consider that. But I haven't seen anything thus far that might not be the normal, the new normal of long-range strikes that you're talking about. Because where you are identifying the increased tempo that you are talking about is primarily with the long-range strikes, meaning drones, particularly the Garan and missiles, right? But with, shall we say, the beginning of the summer offensive, right? Because that's what we're in now. We're still in the beginning phases of the summer offensive. That would be expected anyway. Mm-hmm. So I can't say for certain that I'm seeing a deliberate increase in tempo, right? Even in long range strikes, that might not ordinarily be the menu anyway, right? It may be, right? But I haven't seen anything. If I start seeing things that would not normally be part, like Oreshnik strikes or something like that, or definitive statements. One of the things that, shall we say, Russian chatter, right, on the Telegram channels and military analysis suggests that the Kremlin made a decision last week to request from what is essentially a secret judicial body. The Russian government, contrary to belief, is a government of laws, and sometimes very strict and bureaucratic laws that seem to make no sense. But they cannot just conduct assassinations like the Kiev regime can, or the U.S. evidently can, right? I mean, Trump could just order the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, or and so forth. The Russian government is not so cavalier with these things, which is why we haven't seen the targeted assassination of either Kiev regime political intelligence or military leaders, right? Even throughout this conflict. Well, after last week's attacks, particularly, of course, the air base attack, the rumors are that Russia has requested permission. The Kremlin has requested permission of this secret judicial body for the targeted strikes and assassinations, if you want to call it that, on the Kiev regime's intelligence leadership, like the SBU. Now, my response to that would be, you haven't been doing that so far, right? Why not?
Right.
Because considering some of the assassinations of thousands of East Ukrainians, right? The political leaders, activists, bureaucrats, officials, anyone and everyone that have occurred over the last decade. Thousands of East Ukrainians or former East Ukrainians who identified as Russian, right? The assassinations of Vladimir Tatarsky and Daria Dugina, right? Russia, inside Russia, the assassinations of Russian generals, right? This with terrorist bombings, right? They hit the head of the chemical, biological, radiological defense forces with a terrorist bombing hidden inside a scooter outside his apartment building. These sorts of things. Why hasn't Russia responded to that earlier with trying to get the SOBs responsible for it? So I have heard before that there were attempted missile strikes on intelligence headquarters, right, in Kiev and elsewhere, that with varying degrees of success over the last 3 years. But this might be a more concentrated campaign beyond just, shall we say, missile strikes, doing whatever they can to take out these people. And it's certainly called for, right? It's certainly I would even say a proportionate response to what the Washington Post, right, David Ignatius, heralds as the beginning of the Kiev regimes of Ukraine's dirty war, right? With less success on the battlefield, they, right out on the front pages of the Washington Post, they say that the Kiev regime is going to resort to more and more asymmetric warfare, unconventional warfare, terrorist bombings, assassinations, right? You name it, right? But, shall we say, no ethical bounds, restraints of war or anything like that. Not that we've seen so many thus far, but shall we say an increased tempo of such things as the desperation on the battlefield and the need for the Kiev regime to turn the narrative, which is, what they have mostly been fighting this entire conflict is the narrative war. So it's certainly proportionate to that, right? That is the path we're going down to. That's why I say the people who think this conflict is over are, shall we say, putting the cart before the horse. This is going to get nastier. This is going to get bloodier and nastier, right? Particularly with an asymmetric warfare campaign, right? That will presumably go right up until the end and then go beyond that, right? Because we know the CIA has openly admitted that before the conflict even began, they were training the Kiev regime's forces, special forces, military intelligence in the U.S. to wage a guerrilla war after the Kiev regime fell. So this is already going back to 2019 to 2021, before right? Russia launched the SMO. They were already preparing, for this, and obviously, there has been a whole new evolution, with the advents of drone technology in a big way, and just the means of such a asymmetric warfare campaign, a war of dirty tricks, a dirty war, have vastly increased in both potential and capability. So that is what we're looking for, and Russia seems to finally be, again, this is chatter, this is unconfirmed, right? Because this is not being reported in the Russian state media. This is being reported by Russian military analysts, war journalists, and bloggers. So, I mean, just be prepared that there's going to be a lot more. I've been saying it for already since, more than a year now. Dirty tricks, right? As the Kiev regime loses on the battlefield, it will not surrender. It will not come to terms. They will resort to dirty tricks, to asymmetric warfare, to try to, both hurt the opponent, but more importantly, I think often increase the morale, the propaganda morale of their own population and of the Western political elite that constantly needs some type of reassurance that all the money and arms they are sending are killing some Russians, right? They constantly be reminded.
It is shocking to me that they require permission from a court to go after political leaders that are allowing this stuff. Like, meaning, as you point out, Obama had a kill list. He just had a kill list. Obama killed Americans on that kill list and their kids. We didn't think twice about it. Obama didn't go to a court. Obama just said, hey, give me a list of people we need to kill. And that was the end of it. Zelensky, they've been murdering people left and right, as you've pointed out. Hell, in that village that they were in Kursk, they murdered every last, right? No one survived in Kursk village. Porchania, head of the Porchania Village Council in
small village. Everyone who was in the village when the Kiev regime forces rolled in, anyone who didn't escape beforehand,
they killed everybody. And you're telling me that a band of terrorists, as Putin called them, that Putin has to give permission to end the lives, remove them from this physical matter reality? That's astonishing.
I've lived in Russia for most of the last 2 decades, right? And one thing I can say is that Russia is a country of law. Now, often it is bureaucratic law, sometimes to an excessive degree, right? But Russia is a country of law. Now, sometimes those laws seem, shall we say, slightly on a different, not 100% different, but slightly on a different angle to the normal idea of law in, say, the United States, which,
right.
There's a lot of questions about the law inside the United States. Just take a look at U.S. prisons and right. Anyway, don't need to go into a critique of the U.S. Judicial and legal and police system. The summary executions of, shall we say, people of certain skin tone and the like that regularly occur. But Russia is a country of laws. Now, the one thing I would say that in general there has been a massive streamlining of Russian bureaucracy over the last 2 decades, right? Still laws, but a streamlining of bureaucracy. But to be fair, they had a long way to go, because when I first came here, I could easily define some of that bureaucracy as Kafka-esque, right?
Yeah. Now
I would just say it's normal, right? Normal, bureaucracy that you would expect to find in any modern first world country, right? Not smooth across the board, right? Some places it's more, some places it's less, sometimes it's, remarkably free. But Russia is a country of laws. And Putin, yes, he did serve in the KGB, FSB, but he was his education is as a lawyer, right? Dmitry Medvedev also as a lawyer, right? So that is, the paradigm of thought that they come from, right? Just because we don't go, the Western press caricatures the Russian government, right, as dictators, authoritarian, right? Oh, it's just Putin, evil Putin, the dictator, the Dark Emperor, the leader of the orcs. However, whatever cartoonish image they want to create of their opponent for propaganda purposes. But the truth is that Russia is a country of laws, its own laws, but that it adheres to. Sometimes, to an excessive degree, and this would be one of those cases that I think, well, why haven't you taken those kids' gloves off before? That's what I would say, and I would imagine that the Russian generals, and intelligence apparatus have also, shall we say, been chafing at the bit sometimes at some of the restrictions that the Russian civilian government has placed on them. They don't air a lot of that dirty laundry in public, but the Russian political talk shows, the Russian, newspapers, and especially, the Telegram channels that are one of the biggest, shall we say, alt media in Russia. They have been,
chafing at that leash.
Chafing at the bit for some time now, right? So, but again, when the Russian government shows its pragmatism, its restraint, right? It's cold-blooded reaction. There was a very interesting article in a Russian newspaper, Redovka, right? That is, I would say, a patriotic, at the political level newspaper. But they talked about the type of response, that was needed in response to Operation Spiderweb. And what they basically said is, we don't need a response. We don't need retribution. We don't need to be responding to what they do, right? Ceding them the initiative in that way. We don't need to be making our military decisions based on some emotional reaction, right? I think we had this conversation last week, right after it happened.
It's not an emotional reaction. That's the part I disagree with. It's not an emotional reaction. There's a logical...
I've been here long enough. I can tell you what the Russian reaction to things like this is. The Russians are a long-suffering people, right? Their history, right? There various things define the Russian nature, right? And you could talk about Americans, one of the chief. You can debate the reality of it, right? But the American dream of picking yourself up by your bootstraps in a world of opportunity, of often unbridled, brutal opportunity, right? I know, and only for a few, but anyway. But the Russian, one of the characteristics of the Russian nature is that historically, being at the crossroads of Eurasia, not an island continent, with non-offensive countries to the north and south of it, hidden on the other side of the world, but smack dab in the largest continent of the world, with China and the Islamic world and an aggressive European world, surrounded on all sides. Russia has a long-suffering history of people trying to go to and fro with their military conquests across what has, been, the continuous political expanse, going back to the time of the Mongol horde, right? Of Genghis Khan, right? That was the first political, really, unity of the region, of the center of Eurasia like that. So they're used to war, right? They're used to suffering as a result of that, right? And they... Yes, I mean, on an individual level, yes, Russians feel, gut reactions. But there's a societal, a political level, what I would say that, the Russians are capable of taking a blow and just keep doing what they're doing, as long as what they're doing is leading to victory in the end.
So, Maya, I so disagree with you on this one. And that point may be true. I accept that point. That's the way the government takes it.
Yeah.
But the fact that you said that there were all these channels chomping at the bit, and the
Yes.
military is
That's why I
trying
said
to,
there's different levels, there's different layers of response to it, right? And the Russian government, the Russian military operates, and I think always operates at a different level. And the rest of the world should be thankful that the Russian political military system shows more pragmatism and restraint than their provocative Western counterparts, because otherwise we would already be glowing. We would all already be glowing.
as I keep telling people, I'm an American. My point of view is going to be governed by where I live. And that would have been unacceptable. Like that would have been so, like, meaning I get it's a war, right? But from my point of view, when we fight our wars, we take down power lines, bridges, electricity, roads. Like all of that stuff is decapitated.
Yeah, but it's good when the U.S. does it. It's not good when someone else does it to American proxies, right? That's all. Our glorious evil leader, their evil dictator. That's standard propaganda.
What is the significance of Russia taking Dnepropetrovsk, or let's say invading or entering Dnepropetrovsk for the first time? Because this seems like
first of all, it's not really the first time. Actually, Russian DRG groups have been there across the border already several weeks ago. I think we probably mentioned it before, right? But this is time the Russian military, the Russian Ministry of Defense, is officially announcing their arrival, right? And that they intend. And what's more is, for the first time that I've heard of it, they're talking now about their operations. They're designed to create a buffer zone as well, like they've been already long been talking about in the Kharkov region, the Sumy region, as of a couple weeks ago, the Chernigov region, but now in a completely different vector, not the northern Russian-Ukrainian border, but in Dnepropetrovsk, right? In, shall we say, central eastern, right? Ukraine, right? And one thing it tells me right there is that with this latest round of Russia delivers its terms at the, shall we say, the diplomatic war of maneuver that occurred at Trump's pushing, Russia presented their terms and said, agree to our terms now, or we're going to take more, right? The conditions, not only in terms of land, because that's not really the most important thing, but the terms will get harsher. And I believe it's been said outright, next time it won't be terms, right? It will be demands for an unconditional surrender, right? And we'll decide the way it ends 100% on our own, rather than say only 80 or 90%, and the other 10% can be negotiated. No, it won't be that anymore. And I think that's a signal. The Russian Ministry of Defense announcing their arrival on Dnepropetrovsk means that they're heading for, at the very least at this part, all of eastern Ukraine east of the Dnepro River.
Interesting. Because it seems like they're eventually going to offer Sumy membership into the Russian Federation.
Sure.
There was thoughts about the Dnepropetrovsk.
I have no doubt. And the Dnepropetrovsk as well, yes, right.
Yeah.
And there's a far bigger argument for regions like Kharkov. Don't forget Kharkov, because Russian forces are advancing their quote-unquote buffer zone there as well. And when I say quote-unquote, right, actually there is real reason and military rationale, right, and political rationale for a buffer zone. I just don't believe that it's ever going to stop with a buffer zone, and I believe there will be referendums for people's republics in all of these areas eventually as well, right?
And you have to make another buffer zone.
Again, Russia made clear, right? Take our terms now, or it's going to get worse. This happened repeedly, right? It was the before the conflict, the Istanbul communique back in 2022, right? And now we're Istanbul, shall we say, round 2, and once again Russia offered terms and the opponent didn't take them, and it's All right, we're already set on the next horizon, right? That's where they're going. Now, the first horizon still has to be achieved, and that will be the majority of the work this summer, right? In the Donetsk region, the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka line, right? Yes, polishing up Pokrovsk and Seversk as well at the north, the south, and the north of that remainder of Donetsk. But in other areas like west of Pokrovsk, yes, Russian forces are already moving into Dnepropetrovsk, and there's very little to no defenses there, and the terrain is very different, right? It's not these small, urban agglomerations of small towns rolling into each other in hilly forested territory, right? You're moving into steppe. And that's a completely different battlefield that is not as favorable to a defender in general, and is certainly not in favor to a defender where the person on the offense has near complete dominance of the air, right? And long range strike, artillery and long range strikes like
Just
that.
to be clear, it's because there's no to hide. There's nowhere to hide. There's no.
Oh yeah, there's very few settlements, right? They're spread out much further. There's no hills. There's very little forests, right? It's flat, open steppe terrain, right? For the most part, right? As soon as you get past the Donbass, right, you're entering into that territory up until the Dnepro River, and that Russian forces their advances in territory like that is going to be more limited by their own logistics than any kind of organized resistance, right? Because the terrain is so massively different. Me and a few others like Brian Berletic have been talking that would mark that terrain change. Once you got out of the Donbass war, you would see things happening much faster, territory taking shape much faster, and all of the advantages, right, in that new type of terrain go to Russia rather than to the Kiev regime at this point, particularly because they haven't built up any defenses. If they had built up significant defenses, then we could argue about it, but they haven't, right? They haven't.
Well, not even in Sumy have they built up defenses.
No,
I mean,
not even in
mayor in Sumy. I mean, they are streaming at multiple sides in the Sumy.
A lot of that is due to corruption. I mean, the ever pervasive corruption in Ukraine. We saw this already a year and a half ago when Russia began moving south into the Kharkov region, right, in the direction to create a buffer zone, right, in the Kharkov region. There were lots of complaints at that time that all of the money that had been spent to supposedly build defenses and trench lines and bunkers hadn't resulted in anything actually being built. Mm-hmm. So that is a constant problem. That's the Kiev regime. What do you want? I mean, that they have to deal with that on their own. We've seen the Kiev regimes, the Rada, their parliament, their MPs, Rada members like Bezuglaya, who actually made a political, shall we say, a little bit of a political focus or a circus, depending on your point of view, going to some of these places and pointing out that there's no defenses, or the defenses that were built make no sense, right? And follow no military logic or strategy, and were unmanned and so forth. Well, that's going to become much more a thing. Remember, in the Donbass, that is where the Kiev regime planned to fight and defeat both the shall we say separatists who never accepted the West-backed Maidan Putsch, and Russia, because of the terrain, of the tight urban agglomerations. They built up defenses there for 8 long years before Russia started their intervention. And well, that was a cost of not starting the intervention back in 2014, is then having to go through that, right? And the fact that in 2014 the Kiev regime didn't have a military, because the military was not either in good situation or at all obeying the commands of the new putsch in Kiev.